Greetings, one and all. We are more tonight.
Up by 50%.
Yes. Graeme, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Long time no see. I love seeing you again, and I pray that we will have many more opportunities to converse.
Indeed.
Who joins us is my AIOCS colleague, Wagdy Samir. Some of our viewers know him from a very mini series, which he abruptly cut short on our conversations about Father Mata El-Meskin and Father Dumitru Stăniloae. So a Copt and a Romanian in conversation via the epigons. Wagdy is with us as an interested party, on this note, let's turn to what we promised the audience. By the way, Graeme, for some reason, the most interesting, apparently, and appealing conversation is number 4 again. Trend is, hundreds of viewers, and the rest lag behind for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so for those who haven't had a chance to watch our previous recordings or want to start the whole thing from number 4 again, the pretext of this conversation with Dr. Graeme Finlay is an article he recently published in a journal that I have the honor to co-edit, Christian Perspectives on Science and Technology. It's a journal edited by or published by ISCAST, the major faith and science player in Australia. And if you go to current articles, you'll find here the Primal Testament, parallels between evolutionary and biblical history. So these are the articles published so far this year. We are working simultaneously on 2 issues. One of them is the regular annual issue of the journal. The other one is a special issue, guest edited by people from overseas on spiritual and artificial intelligence. But what matters here is that if you push the button, you can read Graeme's article as a web page, if that's your fancy, or you can download it or just open the PDF as I do now and have a taste of it. It's, I guess, an exemplary treatment of the sort of faith and science promises and usually doesn't deliver. And it has to do with Graeme's dual expertise. He's a cell biologist by training and career, but also a theologian. This is number 4 in a series of articles, all of them published in the last 2-3 years in the same journal, where Graeme attempts to bridge the 2 otherwise different worlds of biology, evolutionary biology, and biblical history, biblical wisdom. And what prompted all this conversation, this series of conversations, we are now trying to wrap up this cycle, is the appendix to this 4th article, which is a very interesting faith and science narrative, if you like, or as I like to call it, a narrative of everything, a poem in poetic form. And when I read this appendix, this poem, which actually would deserve a standalone position rather than being relegated to an appendix, I had this desire to return to my conversations with Graeme, because we had a couple of conversations before, and to actually discuss this narrative of everything, which is insightful on many levels, including from the viewpoint of interest here, this capacity to bridge, or well, let's call it proposal to bridge the worlds of science and faith in a way that, again, you don't come across too often. It is real science unmixed with ideology, and it's real faith, a devotional faith. And I call it devotional because you'll recognize the mark of a very worshipful, prayerful spirit behind those references to matters of faith. So this is the appendix I was mentioning, a freedman's worship, the point of it all. And I believe that here Graeme managed to give us a sense of how these different worlds can be integrated harmoniously without committing the sin of confusing the realms or mixing methodologies, and still come out of this reading, and we suggest a reflective reading of it, better equipped and perhaps more established, more grounded in one's own faith as a believer living in this world of science. So that's my recapitulation, introduction to the spirit of our conversations that unfolded so far. We commented on this poem. It has been a fascinating discussion from my viewpoint. It's indeed a privilege to have been able to keep Graeme for myself for a number of weeks, 8 conversations. It has been really a festival for mind and heart. And given my selfishness, I lured him into yet another conversation, this time round, much more informal, where we can actually review some of the things we said before, perhaps open up new avenues of thought. Graeme, what do you reckon?
Fire ahead, Doru. One thing I would say, you can't really call me a theologian. I have but a bachelor's degree in theology, so I'm an amateur in that regard.
Oh,
But,
yeah, that's not what I saw in your writings.
But seeing our place in God's great missio Dei, in his great plan, is a wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful occupation to pursue. And I guess it's that joy which has motivated me to write on theology and science. How science is really nested within our theology.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's also part of our scriptural tradition. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Whatever level of science was available at the time, but it's still there.
Indeed. I mean, the early church fathers were men deeply schooled in the Greek knowledge. And then as you approach the scientific revolution, the early scientists of the Middle Ages were all theologians at Oxford and Paris and other institutions like that. And the so-called scientific revolution was really a revolution in Christian thought.
Anyway, Wagdy was telling us earlier about the journey of discovery, if you like, he experienced by watching our recordings. Wagdy, would you like to share with us some of your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, this whole area is really, really brand new for me. I've never really delved into the overlap between science and theology. Despite my scientific career, I've actually never sort of tried to sort of figure out how do I marry it with my faith. And just following having attended the conversations that Father Doru and Graeme had, I sort of started trying to educate myself a bit, but as basically as I can in the area of life sciences, mostly biology and cells, and I know zero about it. So it's like really, and it is actually quite fascinating, but yet fairly complex for someone who knows nothing about it, the terminology, the taxonomy. But I've started sort of enjoying, and I'm trying to find parallel. What I was comforted by, but it's a fairly long journey for me from now on, is to what I've gathered is it's not a conflict. It's not like I tend to sort of find it discomforting when you get, let's just focus on Christians attacking non-Christian scientists and vice versa. And it was nice to sort of see a conversation that is focused on Christianity, but trying to make sense of science without really feeling threatened by it. So I'm happy to sort of listen to further discussions, and I'll keep on educating myself.
Yeah, from my viewpoint and taking my cue from what you were saying, Wagdy, it's always a mystery how someone can be an evolutionary biologist and a devout Christian with theological training up his sleeve, as Graeme is. Would you care to share a bit of the mechanics of this process that must be unfolding at the back of your mind, Graeme? How is it to be a real scientist and also a devout Christian?
There's no problem really, Doru. Let's face it, in the cancer lab where I worked, probably 20% of us were Christians, chemists and biologists, which is, yes, it's above the national average, certainly. But to me, I was not interested in evolution for many years. I was a cell biologist, small things amuse small minds. I lost interest above 20 microns. That's what I've told people. But when the genome came out, and it became obvious that we were an evolved species because our DNA is effectively barcoded. It's a record of itself. I felt I had to tell fellow Christians. But all this time I had been concerned, as you had previously mentioned at Wagdy, that there is this conflict between people. And I just hate this conflict because it is based on wrong presuppositions. And the worst presupposition is that if you can explain something mechanistically, then you can deny its purpose, which of course is ridiculous. I mean, if you can explain the mechanisms of a washing machine, that does not mean it is not there to clean clothes.
Right.
So there is this complementarity of mechanism which science investigates and meaning or purpose or telos, which faith investigates, so that we can bring them together so easily because they are simply different aspects of different ways of looking at the same reality.
So yeah, I suppose in one of the again. In most, I mean, I've been reading in theology as in self-educating for many, many years, but only formally through the research work that I've done recently under the supervision of Father Doru, which really got me to read a bit more in an academic way rather than sort of, and I coming from a Coptic Orthodox background, again, I'm fairly focused on patristics and what the church fathers have said the first 400 and something years. And but one thing I've noticed personally is that, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy within patristic, I'd be interested in your input as well as Father Doru, is I found that if a believer, a Christian believer, focuses only on the literal meaning of the text, on the letter, they really find that the conflict with science becomes huge. Whereas when you start elevating the meaning from, okay, there is a literal meaning, but historical, well, things happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean exactly the same in sort of by letter. You start sort of opening your mind to other possibilities. I find that the spiritual meaning, like the higher level meaning, or the deeper meaning, if you want to think about it, opens opportunities to sort of say, yeah, that's not a problem to have, for this to happen, or science to say, like, so an example is the 6 days of creation, it's 6 by 24, that sort of stuff. That sort of, if you look at it that way, you just get really stuck forever. And life is 6,000-7,000 years, as opposed to whatever, the millions of years. So what's your perspective on the literal versus the spiritual or deeper meaning when it comes to science?
Sorry, you're speaking to Father Doru?
Either of you, that's fine.
I'd hesitate to beef in when there are two theologians here, but I mean, clearly, the exegete has got to approach the text in a way that would have made sense to somebody reading it 2,500 years ago, or whenever it was written. So they would approach the text with, at the back of their mind, the prevailing stories and metaphors and mythologies of Canaan and Babylon and the surrounding countries, the surrounding empires. And so the early chapters of Genesis, I think the best way to approach them is to see them as the response of Israel's teachers to the cruel and crass polytheism of their surrounding cultures. They were showing the glory of Yahweh, of Israel's God, against the crude pantheism of the scorpion kings and the snake kings and all the other gods of the Babylonians and the Canaanites. So I think this reading with the mythologies of Babylon behind us is immensely liberating, because it shows us the glory of Israel's God, as opposed to the cruel and horrible gods of the Babylonians and the Canaanites and whoever. And I think that's true for the first 11 chapters of Genesis also, which they were theology in story form. And I think, going back to Augustine and others, I don't know, I'm afraid I don't know the patristics well enough. I know I should start reading them, but I think there was also a lot of flexibility in their interpretation, wasn't
there? The example of Augustine is very relevant here, because the man really tried to grapple with Genesis, the first chapters, and he wrote like 5 books on those 2-3 first chapters, or initial chapters, and then he addressed the same topic time and again in his confessions, in his the City of God, in the Doctrina Christiana, the Christian doctrine, and so on and so forth. So that everywhere we turn, or in many of his writings anyway, so not everywhere, because I don't know anybody to have been able to read everything in the shelves and shelves and shelves written by Augustine. But in many places and in important writings, he honestly tries to grapple with the first chapters of Genesis. I don't remember now in which one. I think in the literal meaning of Genesis, he says, I wake up, I read this text every day. I'm fascinated by it, and I try to pinpoint its actual meaning, as in the literal dimension. And when I think I did it, I realize that I understand it differently. Yesterday, my understanding was this. Today, my understanding is that. And every day, it's a different understanding of the literal meaning. And I think that's the most honest appraisal of someone who knows his stuff when it comes to the depths of Genesis. So I find it ridiculously simplistic to claim, as most Christians do today, that such a thing as one single, constant, solid, unquestionable literal meaning can be established. So this shows how far away we are from the wisdom of the earlier generations of Christians. I don't know why we bypass them, but I believe that there's a lot of wisdom there. Those people really struggle to make sense of their own, let's call it, scriptural culture against the backdrop of a very different, strange, foreign to them, and sometimes oppressive culture. Pretty much like our own world, where Christians are less and less in a world that is more and more against them. Yeah. So these people, Augustine and his predecessors and successors, did their best to grapple with the wisdom of Genesis and the rest of the scriptures, and realize that, well, in all honesty, it's an ocean there. You can't drink in one go a whole ocean having a cup of tea. And so this is what led them to not bypass the letter, but realize that the letter has depths that we today have forgotten about. And Augustine's own experience and confession, so to speak, is that, well, that letter has many layers. So the so-called spiritual reading, or allegorical, if you want to use that word, or typological, whatever reading of Genesis or the scriptures and so on and so forth, that's not a matter of bypassing the text, the story. It is a matter of finding the layers that are hidden within the letter. And yeah, as Graeme pointed out earlier, the letter borrows from whatever culture is available. There is a definitely theological message that is communicated, a different theology altogether from those of precedent cultures or the neighbors of the Israelites at the time in Genesis. But those metaphors also show that the teachers of Israel, as Graeme called them, were receptive to the cultural context and articulated the same theological message in a way that made sense both to the immediate recipients and the possible readers from outside the community. And this is where we can intervene in like manner, translating the same theological message in the terms, the concepts, the images, the metaphors, the analogies of our own culture. And this is what I love about Graeme's idea of a primal testament and this narrative of everything, his poem, where he actually communicates the same idea of the days of creation, if you like, but in the language of science. It's to use a phrase from a certain sector of biblical scholarship, it's rewritten Bible. This is how I look at that poem. It's rewritten Bible. Yeah. And I think this is the only way, not only to communicate the message to outsiders. This is the only way for us, people of this century, this time and place, to make sense of that theological message. And when we look at some metaphors such as God took a pile of manure or whatever, mud, and formed the shape of a human being, and then breathed into that shape, spirit, and the human being became alive, you know, that's a powerful metaphor, but not as in this giving us an exact description of the technology of creation, but it's a metaphor of the entire history of life that God used in order to bring us about. And then you are amazed of how contemporary science, evolutionary biology, inform us. This is what I see in that poem. How would you take it, Graeme? How would you take that metaphor in Genesis 2 with the mud or the dust or whatever it is, shaped into us?
Once again, I think it links back in some ways with what the pagan people believed. Did not the Babylonian people believe that mankind was made from the dust of the ground and the blood of a god? So man was sort of half god, half man. But the Jews reinterpreted this. They say, no, we are just dirt of the ground, but we have the very spiritual breath of God. So we are not God, but we are enlivened by him. So again, it's subversive. It changes what the surrounding culture believes and elevates human dignity by making us creatures of the living God rather than some sort of demigod. We're not made of the blood of a god, but we are enlivened by the spirit or the wind of God. So again, it gives us dignity. And the fact that we are the image of God, to the ancient Babylonians, only the king was the image of God. But to the Jews, we all share that dignity. So our dignity is democratized, which is at the basis of the biblical concern for the poor and the needy and the downtrodden and the outcast and the malformed. They all share, all of us, the very image of God. So the image of God rightly is a very subversive concept because it overthrows the idea of only the king having that image and nobody else is worth anything. I think you can see these things again and again in those early chapters.
Yeah, it is. How does this topic of being in the image of God fare in biological terms? Have you managed to give an explanation or ground in whatever we know, scientifically speaking, about human nature in terms of the image?
To my understanding, we don't try to do that because through history, the image has been given different specifications depending on what people are thinking about at the time: rationality, creativity, moral discernment, all these things. But so it's really, the image of God is really a theological idea. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it really expresses our role. Our role is to represent God. So it's not a biological concept at all. Our role is to be God's vice-regent, his representatives in his creation, his priests, if you like, who bring to God the adoration of creation and to send out to creation the goodness, love, and the care and the blessings of God.
So being in the image is a let's call it an intangible aspect of the human constitution, to paraphrase Saint Gregory of Nyssa, that has no bearing whatsoever, biologically speaking, and the existence of this other layer of the human existence requires, by definition, deciphering from a different set of tools, methods, criteria than what the sciences have in their arsenal today. It means that when we talk about human nature and being in the image of God, we are talking already about an interdisciplinary kind of space where the sciences and theology have to shake hands. Is it that?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the science provides the preconditions for the imago. I mean, we do need to be able to think abstractly. We need to be able to communicate. We do need language. We do need these things which have a scientific basis to them. But they combine in humans and human beings alone in such a way that we can relate to God and so be his servants and so be his representatives on earth. Just as the ancient kings of Babylon had images which they scattered around their domains, their dominions. Tselem and Demut, I think, sorry, I've never done Hebrew, but I think they were the very terms which have been found on ancient statues, the image and the likeness of the king. So when you see this image, remember, this image represents the king far away in Babylon or wherever. And so we are that image and likeness, that's Tselem and Demut, because we are representative of the Creator God. And when I see you, I see someone who is able to reflect something of the illimitable, unknowable God on earth. So it is an intangible idea, it's a theological idea, but it's had immensely important implications, hasn't it? Because from this Bible story has come the idea of human rights. The Greeks never had it, the Romans never had it. The ancient people never knew about human rights. That comes from the Bible. It comes from this theological concept
Of human dignity.
That we bear God's image.
Wow.
And so it really brings us to I think I mentioned this in one of our conversations. Scientists speaking as scientists are very careful to say that we are non-exceptional. It's a scientific dogma that you look in our DNA and you can't tell whether it's a chimp or a human. But as whole persons, we are exceptional because our biology comes together in such a way that we can interact with the infinite. So there's a lot of confusion here. I remember seeing somebody reviewing one of my books saying that, Finlay is off the tracks because he believes in the doctrine of non-exceptionalism. Theologically, we are exceptional. Biologically, we examine our heads and our cells and our DNA and our chemicals just as we would do with a worm or a chimp. We are non-exceptional. But theologically, we are indeed exceptional.
So, two kinds of revelations. The Primal Testament reveals our humility, and the Old and the New Testaments reveal our dignity.
Yes, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Yes.
Well, it's a point based on your concept of primal Old and New Testaments.
Yes. The Primal Testament provides the preconditions for human beings as persons.
Graeme, what prevents many scientists from thinking as you do, from adopting different angles when it comes to, well, let's call it human mystery? Why they can't see that the object they study, this nature, this body, this flesh, doesn't exhaust the human mystery, who I am, who you are, who Wagdy is?
I guess it's a question of faith. Because these days, scientists maybe are so obsessed with the success of science that they forget the preconditions under which the scientific method arose. And we did discuss it, I think, this in another day. The scientific method arose when Christians of diverse backgrounds, think of the Royal Society in England. They just come out of a bloody civil war, which was divided on cultural, religious, political, ideological grounds. But the fellows of the Royal Society were all Christians of one sort or another. And they said, look, let's look at the physical world. We will leave all our other differences at the door. We will concentrate just on the physical, just on the mechanical. We will just weigh air and look at the gas laws if you're a Robert Boyle. And so that's what they did. But within a few generations, people were saying, well, now look, when we do science, we don't need God. But that they've forgotten that was a presupposition, a methodological limitation of doing science in the first place. So of course Richard Dawkins doesn't need God. If he thinks that science is the only way of knowing, which he does. But he's forgotten that the early scientists said, look, we will leave all our human discussion, all our personality discussions aside for the moment when we weigh atoms and molecules and look at the mechanics. So the modern tendency to secular, depersonalized scientism really represents a form of cultural amnesia.
Wow.
We've forgotten the self-imposed modesty of science. And really, scientism, the idea that science is the only thing there is ridiculous, because to say science is the only way of knowing is in fact a metaphysical statement. So it's self-contradictory. But they get away with murder.
I know I've got only 5 minutes before I have to go, but a question, I don't know if it will be able to be addressed in the 5 minutes, but Graeme, what's your views on how science understands the soul? And do they see a difference? Does it see a difference between soul and spirit in the human being?
That's a little over my head, I think, Wagby. I think Christians themselves differ, but I mean, the soul, the psyche, I think to the Jewish, to the Greek thought is simply the life. So we don't have a soul, we are a soul. And I'm sure you and Doru would be much more qualified to speak in this.
From a biological viewpoint, what is the soul? Is it like basically the connection between neurons? Like, how would scientists sort of define a soul?
I'm not a psychologist, but I don't see that comes from the same word. I don't think that they would attribute the soul to any particular thing. Mind you, there are various degrees of metaphysical interpretation of psychology as well.
Right.
So, the behaviorists and and other people like that, who just see the human personality as being the result of incredibly complicated neurochemistry. So many would probably write away the idea of the soul or the spirit. So again, the fullness of soul and spirit, I think, come from the Bible. The spirit is the animating part of us, which gives life to our psyche. I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I? So these are rich theological contexts, but I don't think a scientist would worry him or herself about them if they had a materialistic outlook. Because if once again, coming to the doctrine of non-exceptionalism, if we're just a particularly smart ape, which to me is ridiculous, simply because sometimes apes can show empathy and sometimes elephants can grieve and that sort of thing. You can see the beginnings of various aspects of human personality in the biological kingdom. But in nowhere does it come to this fullness that we see in human beings. But for the doctrinaire materialist, there is no soul and no spirit. We're just body.
There's an interesting discussion in Vladimir Lossky's mystical theology of the Eastern Church, where he tries to grapple with the concept of soul in modern terms. What he does, he's not going to biology because, as Graeme pointed out, this is a concept that is completely foreign to materialism. But he draws on modern psychology, the philosophy of the person, and so on and so forth. And he says, if there will be something in modern terms to equate the traditional concept of soul, this would be person. And Lossky, in the chapter on anthropology in his book, actually refers to soul and body in terms of the person and the nature, which again is duality of the same strength and strangeness to science as what we discussed earlier in terms of the image of God and human nature and biology. Yeah, the image and being biological entities. And yeah, I don't think we should force an agreement between so incommensurable methodologies as biology and theology are. Sometimes we can establish certain correspondence, but that's not always possible. If an evolutionary biologist, especially a materialist one, wants to use the word soul, I'm certain that he or she will apply it to the whole complex of the living organism that we are. But that's not a satisfactory explanation, at least from the viewpoint of what we might hold.
I think many Christians, again, I think there is a diversity of opinion amongst Christians, but there's this term dual aspect monism, which doesn't see the soul as something separate or something material that floats away when we die. But it's simply looking at the human being, this psychosomatic unity, which I think is the Jewish way of understanding us. We're a psychosomatic unity, such that the soul is the personality, which is deeply embodied in our physicality. But when this body dies, we will be re-embodied in a resurrected body, which is of God's own choosing, of God's own providing. So soul is not a separate thing, I think, even for Christians.
Sure.
But It is the whole person which will be re-embodied in the resurrect.
Yeah.
You happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, well, these are open questions, of course, and we haven't set out to put the proverbial full stop at the end of our conversations. I am really grateful, Graeme, for your time, and I do hope and pray that we can return to our conversations. And I'm also grateful to Wagdy for joining us tonight. It has been a beautiful moment of fellowship, of sharing ideas and views, and I hope that those who will be watching this recording will be, if not satisfied with our questions and answers, at least they will see a reason to keep going and pursuing the truth from the bottom of their hearts. Once again, many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Lovely to meet you, Wagdy.
Lovely meeting virtually, Graeme. Hopefully one day
Yes,
face to
indeed.
face.
God bless you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Father Doru, for the opportunity.
All the best, everyone. Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.